All right, let's jump right into this explainer. We're going to dissect what is, frankly, one of the most unbelievable financial heists in history. And we're looking at it strictly through the lens of compliance and the law. If you're in AML, criminal justice, or financial compliance, well, grab a notepad, because the 1MDB scandal is basically the ultimate masterclass in what happens when the guardrails of the global financial system just completely disintegrate. $5 billion. That's right, over $5 billion vanished from a Malaysian sovereign wealth fund. It's almost hard to wrap your head around that number, isn't it? But what makes this case study so incredibly fascinating to us isn't just the sheer scale of the theft. It's the fact that this mountain of cash slipped right past the world's biggest banks, the most prestigious accounting firms, and all of their supposedly strict Know Your Customer or KYC protocols. So here's our roadmap for this autopsy. We're going to cover the anatomy of the heist, the offshore shell game, how they actually trace the laundered funds, some of those advanced layering techniques, and finally, the massive compliance breakdown.
Kicking things off with Part 1, the anatomy of the heist, focusing on the mark and the mastermind.
So the entire operation literally hinged on this guy, a 20-something mastermind named Jho Low. Now, Low operated completely without an official title at the 1MDB fund, which is wild in itself, but he had incredibly high-level political cover from Malaysia's then Prime Minister. By leveraging the massive borrowing power of a state fund, he basically reeled in these prestigious global financial institutions, making his schemes look like totally legitimate, government-backed investments.
Moving right along into Part 2, let's look at the offshore shell game they used to create this grand illusion.
You see, to move billions of dollars, you obviously can't just wire it to a personal checking account, right? Look at how easily Lau completely bypassed customer due diligence. He just created offshore corporate lookalikes. It's so simple, it's scary. On the left here, you've got Avibar Investments PJS. That's a very real, very legitimate subsidiary of an Abu Dhabi sovereign wealth fund. But on the right, Avibar Investments Ltd. That's a fake shell company set up in the British Virgin Islands. Just by tweaking the legal suffix of the company name, Lau tricked major international banks into sending hundreds of millions of dollars directly into his own pockets. The banks literally just assumed they were dealing with a legitimate Abu Dhabi fund.
Of course, a deception like this absolutely required inside help. When bank compliance officers finally woke up and started asking questions about where the money was actually going, 1MDB executives just flat out lied. They formally told the banks, quote, Goodstar is owned 100% by Petra Saudi International Ltd., and they used that lie to justify sending $700 million to this totally unrelated entity. But the reality? Goodstar had absolutely zero connection to Petra Saudi.
Actually, Goodstar was a bearer share company. Now, if you're in financial crime enforcement, you know this is a massive, blaring red flag. A bearer share company is an offshore entity where the ownership legally belongs to literally whoever physically holds the paper share certificate. The whole point of it is to maximize anonymity. And guess what? The single share of Goodstar was held entirely by Jho Low. Yet somehow this completely cleared international correspondent banking checks. Unbelievable, right?
Okay, on to Part 3, tracing the laundered funds. Let's look at the actual plumbing here.
Let's break down exactly how this money moved through the financial plumbing during that first major heist. Step 1. The 1MDB board approves a $1 billion investment into a joint venture with Petra Saudi. Step 2. Only $300 million actually makes it to the joint venture Swiss account. And Step 3. That remaining $700 million, it's immediately diverted straight into that Goodstar account at RBS Coutts we were just talking about. By aggressively misrepresenting the $700 million as a loan repayment, the money just vanished right off the bat.
But here's the tricky part. How do you bring that dirty money onto U.S. soil without triggering every single AML alarm in the system? Well, Low weaponized ILLTs. For those who don't know, these are interest-on-lawyer trust accounts. They're typically set up by U.S. law firms to pool client funds for short-term legal matters. Low essentially used highly prestigious law firms to distribute the money. He was effectively exploiting attorney-client privilege to shield his identity and obscure the illicit origins of his funds from U.S. regulators. Talk about a massive gaping vulnerability in the legal and financial system.
Which brings us to Part 4, advanced layering techniques, or as I like to call it, the wash.
So, once the money was siphoned out of the fund and sitting comfortably offshore, the perpetrators really needed to completely scrub its origins before they could spend it. This is layering. It's the process of hiding the money's origins through a complex, honestly dizzying maze of transactions. The whole goal is to sever the paper trail between the illicit source and the final destination. And honestly, Low executed one of the most audacious layering schemes we've ever seen.
Just take a look at the infamous Amacorp loop.
1MDB needed to show its auditors that they still had money they had actually already stolen. So, what do? They send a small chunk of their remaining cash into a Cayman Islands fund. Then they quote-unquote redeemed it, sending it to offshore EMICORP vehicles, only to immediately route it right back into the Cayman fund. And they repeated this exact same cycle 6 times in a row, literally just spinning the same chunk of money in a circle. But it worked. It created the illusion of a $1.5 billion return on paper, and it completely fooled their Big Four auditors.
All right, part 5, the compliance breakdown. Let's talk about the hard lessons for KYC. We finally arrived at the real autopsy of these institutional failures. And a lot of it comes down to the insider threat. Take a look at this guy, Khadim El-Koubisi. He wasn't just the managing director of the Abu Dhabi fund IPEC, he was also the chairman of Falcon Bank, a Swiss private bank. Conspirators, like Al-Koubisi, literally owned and controlled the very banks that were processing these illicit flows. So when diligent compliance officers at the lower levels raised the alarm, they were just completely overridden from the top down.
Now, for the banks they didn't outright control, they just relied on sheer audacity. Whenever wealth managers queried why on earth a sovereign wealth fund needed to funnel billions through private Swiss accounts, Lowe and his buddies simply claimed it was a highly classified government-to-government secret. And, as crazy as it sounds, in the opaque world of high-net-worth private banking, that excuse actually worked. It completely shut down internal compliance inquiries.
The sheer breakdown of basic protocols across the board is just staggering. Case in point, in 2013, 1MDB raised $3 billion via Goldman Sachs. Right away, $1.2 billion of that was funneled to a fake offshore account called Tenor. From there, $681 million was wired directly into the Malaysian Prime Minister's personal account. This was a massive political payoff, which they cheekily referred to in secret chats as 681 American pies. And to actually pull this off, the bankers intentionally omitted the beneficiary's name, address, and ID number from the wire transfers. Just look at this list. These are glaring red flags that were systematically ignored, sidelined, or just outright bribed away across a dozen major financial institutions. Wires for hundreds of millions of dollars with absolutely no beneficiary names, heavy, constant use of high-risk jurisdictions like the Seychelles and Curacao, the reliance on illegal bearer share companies, a 20-something kid with literally zero official title dictating massive sovereign fund wires, and of course, using identical look-alike company names to completely bypass customer due diligence. So it leaves us with a pretty chilling final thought, especially for those of us working in financial compliance and criminal justice. Think about it. If a 20-something could move billions of dollars right past the world's biggest banks, top-tier auditors, and international regulators using nothing more than fake names, corporate lookalikes, and basic shell companies, what is slipping past your institution's KYC checks today? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it gave you a powerful, albeit slightly terrifying look into the actual mechanics of modern financial crime.